What? Okay, we have a couple people. Hi, Joe and Naomi. Welcome. Should have a few more people coming in. Evelyn. Hi, Evelyn. Awesome. So, if you guys who are watching us can put in the chat where you are watching us from. I know a lot of you are from Connecticut. Um, or if you don't want to say, perhaps what brought you here today. And I'll be doing the introductions while you do that. Um, Hi, if this is your first time here, welcome. I'm Omar Acevedo, and I'm the Literary Program Coordinator at the Mark Twain Housing Museum in Hartford, Connecticut. Thank you for joining us for this virtual program for the Dream in Gold. Virtual programs like this are produced in part with support honoring the late Frank Lord. We are grateful to honor his memory with these programs. And I also want to say thank you to our members. If you're not a member, please consider supporting our museum by becoming a member. There are a lot of benefits to becoming a member. You'll receive free or discounted admission to our author programs. You'll also get you'll also be you'll also be in the know as to when we have really big people coming into the Mark Twain house, because tickets sometimes sell very fast. For example, last year we had Percival Everett for James. You also get free or discounted admission to the House and Museum, year-round discounts in the store and cafe, and much more. You can visit our website for more information, or you can just contact me and I'll put you to the right people. Now on to our guests. Our author, Mai Sennaar, is a graduate of NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, the Smithsonian Affiliate Museum of the African Diaspora, the Berkeley Art Museum, and Pacific Film Archive, as well as the Classical Theater of Harlem, are among the venues that have presented her plays. Her short film Wax Lovers Playlist premiered at AFI Silver Theater and Cultural Center and was an official selection of the Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival. She is the book writer for Carry On, a new musical by Broadway composer Diana Wharton Snar, and the creative director of the performing arts company MWP Live. Our moderator, Vivian Nabetta, is a creative professional with a rich background in arts administration, marketing, and event management. She began her career at Hartford Stage and has worked with renowned organizations like the Amistad Center and the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center. Passionate about education, she now serves as Director of Digital Marketing at Connecticut State Community College. Vivian has served on the board of Cine Studio and contributed to Connecticut's arts agenda. She holds a bachelor's in theater studies from UConn and a master's in American studies from Trinity College. Now, during this event, we encourage you to have a conversation with each other in the chat, as I said earlier. If you have a specific question, though, please post that directly into our Q&A section. You could do that at any time. If you have a question about the book, about Mai or Vivian, please just put that into the Q&A section. It's down at the bottom of the screen. And we'll get to that in about 40 or 45 minutes. So that's all from me for now. I'll be back later. Please sit back and enjoy, and I'll turn this over to Mai and Vivian.
Well, hello, everybody. First of all, welcome, Mai. It's so wonderful to meet you.
Thank you so much, Vivian. It's lovely to meet you as well.
Yes, and so unofficially, it seems like every time I do one of these talks, I always let people know that I take my book talks very seriously. So there's a lot of tabs in here. So I'm very, very excited to speak to you. So usually with our book talks, we know that everybody is on a different journey with the material. So in some cases, people have read it all the way through. Some people might be part of the way, and some people may be here to learn more. For those of you in the audience, we will try not to spoil it for you. But even if we did, don't worry, the book is still good. So you're fine. But if you would start off by just kind of tell us what your book is about, for those of us who might be a little bit newer to the material.
Absolutely. So first, thank you so much, Omar, for inviting me into this series. I love the creed of the series. It's very exciting, and it's a wonderful way to connect contemporary writers to Twain's legacy and impact. So that's really, really cool. Um, the book is about, that's always a hard question. But
Yeah.
the smoothest way forward is the plot. So essentially, a young man of Senegalese origin who grew up in Europe is, for the sake of summary, his young wife uh, is pregnant and sort of freaking out because he is late to return from a Spanish tour of Spain as a musician, and it's in the late 1960s. And the book is about his disappearance and finding him, but it's also about the stories of their families. The young lady is African American, and the young man is Senegalese, but grew up in Europe. And Senegal is a small, tiny little country on the west coast of West Africa. And the book uses their relationships and their connection to talk about the complications of identity, um, in response to, just in the specific context as a person of African descent, in response to the ways that we have moved and immigrated voluntarily and involuntarily for the past 100 years or more. And so the book is about that the complication of sort of what is origin? How do you find home when you've been displaced or you have a family that's traveled and lived in more than one place? And those are not new questions. But what was exciting for me was to explore them within the context of a book that was vibrant and sometimes silly and sometimes mysterious and sometimes just a sort of a kind of a vibrant, sort of popping, sort of loud space, even though a lot of the elements are very, in some ways, almost academic, right? And it's very much historical fiction, but I think it's a lot of fun. So, yeah.
And I would agree. And actually, that's a perfect segue. When I was getting all my notes together and I was looking through everything, I was trying to find the best kind of through line for the book. And so I was flipping through my notes and I said, well, basically, your author's note, which really does set up the book quite well. I'm like, when I think about all the themes, I'm like, this is the theme of the book. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read a little snippet of your author's note for the audience here, because this is the book, at least for me, how I see it. The reality is that our world is but one place. And that, to me, I kept thinking about that, because as you're talking about how you're summarizing the book, because there is a lot there, that is the heart of the book, that our world is one place. And were you thinking about that as you were kind of exploring the book? Because there is a lot. We go to a lot of countries. You know, you mentioned Senegal, you mentioned the United States. Also, at some point, we're in Brazil, we're in Switzerland. You know, we have Black American culture, West African culture, you know, a little bit of French culture. I mean, there's just a lot within the book. And so I'm wondering, with this idea of the world is one place, how did this come to you? How did this happen?
Yeah. It's always exciting when a reader can understand that prism of the author's note and come to the book from that context. That's absolutely the point. I find sometimes that there's a need to sort of help people get to that idea, because it is very amorphous. And I remember even when I was asked to write the author's note, I was sort of nervous about being honest about my intent. Because I was like, nobody's going to understand what you're talking about. And it's been really exciting when people do. So thank you for meeting the book where it is on that point. That's absolutely what I'm saying, and that's absolutely what I'm trying to create. So since you've put it in this context, we can speak on that level. So I
Yes,
will.
please.
So some of it was being a traveling kid and having those moments where sort of Blackness wasn't really going to help me understand or connect to my environment, right? And that created, because Blackness, you know, when you begin to move, it becomes different things in different places, I guess.
Yes. Yes.
And that was first isolating, and then it became delicious and really exciting for me as an artist, right? This idea that, well, if you can't depend on color and you can't depend, how do you define who you are? How do you define where you belong? And that's where music enters the picture. That's where spirit enters the picture.
Mhm.
We find kinship in the strangest ways for the strangest reasons. And that mystery is what it means to be human.
Yeah.
The fact that we can't quite define how we are what we are. And, you know, people get in groups and they say, well, this is how we make our fried trout. And they say, well, our community, we don't make trout that way. And we find little ways to try to feel like there's an us, right? Um, but the book is sort of exploring this idea that perhaps that's never really true. Perhaps there's something more, and there's something we're never going to, that's never going to be definitive to say this is why I'm who I am, right? It has more to do with like love and where you feel like people get you and things that are really amorphous and strange. And so that's very much the intent. I use the African diaspora because that's my context, but I'm talking about a human idea. The strange fact that this is not who we are, right? It's not. It's a nice way to feel like you're in a group for some years, maybe, or language can help with that too. But if you move long enough, you realize, wait, this is not necessarily going to be the way I can identify who I am.
And it kind of going through the book and also within the author's note as well, it's all of those things. And it's to me, it was all of those things, like, you know, you think you know who you are, as you were saying, this group, and that's how you identify. And then as you're going around with Bonnie and Mansour and all these other characters, you know, sometimes you think you have this idea of what it means to be a Black person in a certain way, and you go somewhere else. And that
Yes.
idea is very different. So
Yes.
when Mansour first comes to America, you know, being someone of Senegalese origin who grew up in France, speaking French, doesn't know English, and he comes here and it's a different experience. And, you know, how do you navigate that? But there's also in certain points in the book that there is that unifying. Like you had a
Yes.
quote in the book that says, you know, Black people are so superstitious.
Right.
And it was like, yes, yes. So it's like in and it's out at the same
Yes.
time. And
Yes.
so and when you talked about music, because that is also one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about. Like once I found out, like, where did this book come from? You know, how did this come about? I also am so fascinated, and I so much loved the role that music played. And I want to actually kind of go back to another quote that you had in the book. This was actually from before, right in the very beginning. It was a quote that said, "Stay close to any sound that makes you glad that you are alive." And again, when I was coming back, I was like, that is the other theme of the book.
Yes,
I was
Vivian.
like, that is, and for me, I was connecting. I said, that is Mansour.
Mm-hmm.
That is Mansour.
Yep.
He's the sound that everyone is close to. Everyone wants to be close to stay alive. So maybe
Wow.
I'd love to invite you to kind of talk about Mansour as a character, and then we can get into Bonnie and some of the themes.
First of all, wow, Vivian, you were inside of this thing, and
Oh my, you were
it's
very kind.
it's
You were
incredible.
very
It's so
kind.
incredible. It's really a soul share. So when people
Mhm.
get it the way you're getting it, it really touches the heart. I never knew that was Mansour until you just said that. Whoa, I didn't know that. Um, I chose that quote because I think that's true, particularly for Black people. I think that's true. I think sound has kept us alive. When I think of it being a framework, and when I say Black people, I'm including peoples whose culture is primarily an African one. I'm including Brazilians, I'm including Caribbean folks who, regardless of their physical appearance, how music, like samba music, for instance, you know, that's endemic, regardless of how a Brazilian physically presents, for example. But I should say, perhaps for people of who descended from colonization, colonialism, perhaps I should frame it more in that context. But in any event, it is such a potent tonic. I was in Senegal for this music festival, and there was a singer from, I want to say, Egypt. And I remember I'd gone, and I had like a crazy day, and I'd gone and I was doing some journalism. I was covering the festival, and the way she approached singing, it's like I felt myself be like cleansed, like just listening to her live, something about her vocal tone, something about the way she was moving, like the energy, like rearranged me in the strangest way. And I felt I'd been like this really visceral connection, right? And I think absolutely Mansour does do that.
Yes.
I think he's very much a sort of has this medicine, right? And sometimes he's overwhelmed by said medicine. Sometimes he isn't quite able to negotiate it personally. And what's
Sometimes
fun
he
about
doesn't
him,
understand it either.
huh?
I think sometimes he doesn't understand
He
it
doesn't
either.
understand it at all. At all. That's so true. And I think when he does manage to sometimes use it for himself, and in a lot of pieces about artists, a lot of films about artists, you know, I'm always kind of sad because they talk about, oh, such and such singer moves the audience or something. But artists also move themselves. They also
Yes.
survive by virtue of their art. So that, for me, that's often missing. And constructing him was exciting because I was able to be intentional about imparting how his instrument also is his source to keep sort of moving through some pretty challenging circumstances.
Very.
But him being that quote, damn, that's deep. And
That was it for me. I said, oh.
that is deep. That is deep. And in a way, it's very, very true, very true. But for me, it was again that universal sense of when I think about gospel music, or I think about hip hop, or I think about these sounds being like foundational for like survival of people, also a way to catalog and sort of frame their identity and say, this is who we are, in the absence of before we were allowed to maybe write and publish books or take our histories through like an academic prism or context. We catalog things through storytelling and oral history and sound. And so for me, that was that quote. Yeah, but thank you for that amazing question. And I think we're moving, and I don't know that I answered your question. I think I was so taken by your question, I started swimming it a little bit.
Well, I mean, because when I think about the book, I mean, certainly, and for those of you in the audience who maybe are a little less familiar with the book, Mansour is one of the very main characters, as well as Bonnie. And Mansour traveled to the United States with a very good friend of his who's an Irishman, and they came to the US because they wanted to be singers and kind of make it big in the US. Mind you, neither of them speak English that well. Maybe Liam certainly, his English is certainly much better than Mansour. Mansour is basically like, you know, he is learning as he's in the US. And so when there is when we get to Bonnie, I'm trying to not spill the beans, and I'm also trying
to spill a couple of beans. It's
okay. I'll spill a little tea, just a little bit. And so when, you know, when I think about him as a character, and part of why we're saying why I said that I think that he is the sound that people follow is because he is like the magnet or the sort of the glue for all of the relationships.
Very true.
Within the book. And music, he is a musician, but also when you are reading the book, music is prevalent. He has a line, here where he says something along the lines of when he first heard Otis Redding. And he said something about, if I find the page, I had it bookmarked, but he said something along the lines of, how did this man from Georgia understand being in the peanut fields in Senegal?
Yes.
And when you were approaching music, and now that I hear you say that, music keeps you alive, or it keeps us alive, both metaphorically and actuality. And I think for sure for him, it literally and metaphorically kept him alive. And
Absolutely.
so it was that work with, it feels like that work with music was intentional, kind of going back to everywhere is one place, music is a tie, and even though Blackness presents itself differently, there's still that connection with music.
That's exactly it.
How did you link those threads? Like, how did you, how, especially and keep in mind, audience, this is mostly in the 60s, a little bit in the 70s, and a little bit earlier, but that thread of music, and very particularly Black music, was throughout the book. So, tell me where that came from. Tell me how you started that, or was it
Yeah.
started writing
Um,
and then it happened?
yeah, I had a hunger for expressing what I felt
Mhm.
um, when I was 9, and I went to a party where they were playing Youssou N'Dour. Youssou N'Dour is a very prominent Senegalese musician. I'll never forget this. I proceeded to, not an outgoing child, right? Pretty shy, but I proceeded to just like start dancing like crazy. Like just who knows what came over me. And afterwards someone said, I never forgot this. Someone said to me, we were looking at you dance, and you really can dance even though you don't know the steps. Like you don't know our steps,
Yeah.
right? And it was exactly that sense that I had felt this connection very
Mhm.
much to the sonic palette. We could make that about some ancestral thing, or we could keep it on the spirit thing, right? Like there is the spiritual connection we're all having. And what I found remarkable about Otis is that he sounds so old. Like he has a very wise voice. I was like, he's in his 20s, sound like, I was like, what is happening? And for me, that idea of the voice containing all this history,
Mhm.
voice being a reflection of everything that comes before, like it's holding all these things.
Yeah.
There's this line that Kiefer says to Mansour of, you have 1,000 people in your voice, right? The sense of like the voice being populated by ancestry. And I heard that with Otis. And I said, oh, I think Mansour has some of that. Like there's a bit of like strain, like there's an intensity, there's
Mhm.
this idea of being sort of a container for other people's stuff. Um,
Yeah.
it was very intentional. I'd wanted for years to understand why, how this connection happened, why it happened, what it means, and what retentions exist that we can see that shows that we didn't drop out the sky, right?
Mhm.
I always attribute some of my interest to my parents.
Mhm.
My father did a lot of work with African cultural retentions in the West, and so I grew up in a home where those conversations were prevalent. Um, but it for me was always like there's a sort of for those of us who are aware of our history, there can be a sort of sadness around, the hyphen between African and American, right? And you know, what the heck? How do we make sense of this, right? And so, as a kid who was uh, an African American on the continent, I had an interest always in seeing and feeling that connection. And so, when it would happen organically with music or food or something, even in some of the ways languages were spoken, I was like, oh, that translates in a way that sounds more like African American English, or I would see things and sort of that creates a sense of I don't know, kismet, peace, like a alignment, something. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a great example that you use, that because we also talk about, when we talk about music and the way it kind of can transcend, because if you think about it, going back to Mansour, he didn't really know English, but Otis Redding, he
Yes.
felt something. You know,
Yes.
he just knew something like in his spirit. Um, and I think that that's also another connector with Bonnie. And so, you know, again, audience, for those of you who might be a little less familiar with the book, Bonnie is, you know, to say, you know, is the love interest. I mean, it to me feels like an understatement, because they have a relationship that, oh goodness, I'm trying to find the language without sounding like a little bit cheesy, but they have a connection that is very serious and very passionate, especially considering, you know, where the story goes. But so Bonnie is this young woman, and she lives in the city. She lives in New York with her grandmother. And, you know, Bonnie is also a lover of music. And she grew up around music, and it is a very prominent thing in her life. And Bonnie, I think Bonnie is complex. And what I really love about Bonnie is because she takes us on such a journey. The Bonnie that you start with is not the Bonnie towards, she really does become a woman. And
Mm-hmm.
when they're so this, I'm going to spill a little bit. I'm going to spill a little bit, but I won't spoil it for the audience. But
No
there is a
worries.
moment where, you know, they are supposed to meet. I won't talk about how, you know, they're supposed to come together, but there's this moment where, you know, they're supposed to meet, and like Liam's like, oh yeah, she's right there, and then she's not there, and you're just like, what? What? And I literally was like, wait, the chapter's over. They don't meet, but but the connection is so deep through music. And when Bonnie was young, there's another really great moment in the book where something happens and she's with her grandmother and she needs music at that time.
Yeah.
And I think she picked out, I think it was either like Ella Fitzgerald or
Really.
Sarah, yeah. And her grandmother says, well, and she's a child, audience. She is a child. So this is grown woman music. And her grandmother's like, you know, maybe this is not for you, essentially. And Bonnie's like, nope, I want to play it. And she plays it. And she's like, I feel like a person again. And it's like, again, music that as a connector. As you were writing Bonnie, as you were thinking about Bonnie, was the plan that she also was using music as a connector, that she was going to be such a fan of music? And how do we get to her as a
Yes.
character?
Yes. Bonnie, yeah, you spoke about her so eloquently and so accurately. She's very complex, and she was hard. Um, I'm always protective of Black women that I write, and so I had to learn to let them be flawed and full and complex, and so I let them go now. I let them be who they are. But it's absolutely a journey to womanhood, and I wanted to construct when I try to give a and it's not quite exacting, but when I try to give sort of a framework, if there was any African American female protagonist who sort of precedes her, it would be like a Beneath Younger,
Mhm.
very much an intellectual, very immature, very much into her own sort of perspective on life, and deeply in need, I think,
Mhm.
in deep need and a lot of pain.
Mhm.
Um, And so I wanted a version of girlhood um, that felt a little bit prickly,
Mhm.
um, a little
Wow.
bit self-contained, a lot of fear, but a kind of fear that wouldn't be immediately obvious, right? She seems bold, she's able to speak up, but when she's confronted with real feelings, she can't quite meet the challenge.
Yeah.
And so I wanted something that felt unusual in comparison to sort of portrayals I'd been seeing of young Black girls. I I, um, I think of a character like Troy in Crooklyn,
Mhm.
who's younger than Bonnie, quite a bit younger, but so much depth, so much wisdom. But then also, of course, the immaturity and the need, right, and the pain and dealing with a lot young. And so there were just some Black female portrayals I admired and respected, and they were always girls who were dealing with some sort of sense of isolation from the norm, right? And then figuring out a lot on their own and making like terrible, terrible decisions.
Dr. Emmanuel.
Right. And until they can be a little bit less afraid.
Mhm.
And I knew, and I say this in the book, like he's a little bit older than she is, and he's a little bit more mature in some ways, but they're both very emotionally stunted. And
Yes.
so the only way he could really be with someone, they would have to be emotionally pretty stuck at a younger age, because at his true self, he's pretty stuck too. They're both maybe like 9 or 10
Yeah.
emotionally and they kind of grow each other up when they're trying to make it work. But yeah, and the music with her, I knew I was going to use music to they were going to help me tell the story about the effect of music, and so they had to both be music lovers.
Yeah. And they meet
Um,
for music.
yes, and I knew I wanted all these weird things happen when you're constructing a book. Like things happen that align. Like there was a year in the story that exactly fit a song I happened to be listening to, which was um, Miles Davis. The cover was Cicely Tyson,
Oh, okay.
and I said I have to
I'm
pull
making a
this
note
into.
right now. I'm working on my playlist. So
Oh wow! I said I have to pull this album into the story, and the idea of a cover playing a part in the story. And I won't give that away, but yeah, I wanted music to be operating on every single level, and it was very important that they both were music lovers. It was also important that they were both very much heady people who didn't necessarily share their inner life with a lot of people. I think I say all the time, I think the person who knows Mansour best in the book is Liam, but even he doesn't quite completely understand his friend. So yeah.
yeah. And again, going back to using that thread, it's a lot of really great insight into her, because I think something, regardless of what kind of music you listen to, what style of music, you can always look back and think about music that helped you through a difficult time, music that you listened to when you were happy. So that's something that, again, regardless, you can relate to that. And when I think about some of the other characters, and again, audience, there are quite a few characters in the book. Again, Mansour and Bonnie being the main, but there are other, to even say supporting characters doesn't feel quite right, but they are people who are impactful, but maybe don't have as much on the page. But they are still important. So when I think of Mama, who really took Mansour in, and my theory, and also now that you mentioned Mansour's age, I think some of his stuntedness also, it does come from life experience, certainly, but I think it also comes from the women in his life.
Absolutely.
Because these women are always kind of coming around helping you and saving you and doing all these things, so you don't have
Absolutely.
to.
Absolutely.
Even, I will not spoil it, even towards the end of the book, something happens,
Yes.
and
Yes.
they become like Voltron. I know some
Yes.
people get that reference. They all become like Voltron, and they unite, and they're like,
Yes.
we've got to
Yes.
save our baby.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely true. Yeah.
And so when I'm thinking about Mama and her character, she ends up taking care of Mansour, so she's the mother figure in the story, and music is there for her too.
Mhm.
She talks about, she was initially based, everybody, in Senegal, and there's a story about as to why she had to leave, which you should read when you read the book. And she ends up coming to France. And I specifically remember her saying that when she first got there, in this terrible apartment that she lived in, and it was like the only thing she kept her radio really low, and the only thing she could really listen to was like classical music. And that's how she, learned and loved classical music. But she also talks about, you also hear about music from Senegal from her. So she's also our connection to the beginnings of before there was a
Yeah.
diaspora in that way. She is that, rooting
Yes.
us in not just Mansour as a person, but rooting us in the motherland, so to speak.
Yes.
When you were thinking about her,
Mhm.
because her journey is complex, but it's also something that to a certain degree a lot of people can relate to. Like, when you were thinking about how you were going to to put her on the page, because I think she's the third, if Mansoor and Bonnie are the first, she's the third, and the wheels don't move without her.
Absolutely.
How did you find her? How did you find her?
Yeah, she was hard too. Again, that instinct to sort of be a little bit more protective. I think when did she really come alive? Oh, she came alive when I had to figure out who she was outside of before she was his mom, right? Like what happened to her?
Mm,
And I had to expose her conflicted feelings
yeah.
about the assignment of motherhood,
Mhm.
um, which I think for a lot of women is present and sort of quietly suppressed or not really examined because it's a funny question. Um, so she when I could let her be honest about being conflicted about this role, then she kind of came alive.
Mm,
Um, and also the role of sisterhood, the importance of love that is not romantic in one's life, right? Like how those relationships, losing a brother, losing a sister, how those things define us sometimes more,
mhm.
losing a best friend, right? Sometimes more than romantic partnership.
Yes.
How those loves um, have how they shape who we are, the people we grow up with, the people we look to, the people, our
Mhm.
family. So all those things, she started to breathe and move. And the funny thing is she's young and she acts so old. I mean, she's,
Right?
she's 40, I think, for most of the book, 40-ish. So it's like, and she feels like she's like way older than that.
Yeah, I know
Um,
when I saw, I was like, wait, that's how old she is?
right, right. So that sense again, and like needing again for her to be isolated, right? They're all a little bit isolated because I'm doing a commentary about where home is or isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So having to pull her away from community and her choice to leave alone is so bold. I mean, in her time and in her context. And she does represent the lives of a couple of women close to me who asked me to write about them
Mm-hmm.
and share some of their experiences. But she's mostly a construction of another way to explore the question of, if you leave everything and you start over, where are you from? And then the funny thing of like when you leave the place that was so awful, you're kind of like, well, that wasn't so bad. Too, and perspective.
Yes. Yes. And she was also interesting in a certain way because her journey is that, so much of her life, she suffers a really great tragedy. She takes on a responsibility, or she starts to, um, and then I don't think this is a spoiler. She does go to France. This is not a spoiler. She does leave and go to Europe, but it is incredibly heartbreaking how she gets there.
Mm.
It is just what bring tissues. Just have tissues and but ultimately, to a certain degree, it is a way that frees her, even though it's not the way she had wanted it. It frees her a little bit, and so she gets a taste of life in a certain way, but it's a strange life, and it also shows about community.
Yes.
Going back to what you were saying, everywhere is one place, and the diaspora, the stories, we're also different, but then we also kind of link up in a certain way. When she's on the plane and she's getting ready to leave, and people are like, no, no, so audience, essentially, she's getting on this plane and she's going to go to Europe. She's never been there before. She doesn't know anyone. And this traumatic thing happened, but she's like, I'm getting on this plane. I'm going to go because these people say, hey, you can do this, go on the plane. And her family's concern for her is that she doesn't know anyone, that
Mhm.
she's never been to this place. How can she do this? And the Senegalese folks on the plane are like, oh no, we've got you. We've got you here. Oh, you need food? I've got you. Here, you need this? I've got you. And before she leaves, after she steps off the plane to go home, people have given her their phone numbers. Like, here, if you need something, call me. Here's my address. Here's this. And so in a way, it's home. And one of the characters even said, everywhere being one place, Paris is Senegal. And I know Parisians may think differently, but you know, for them, that's the case. So you built this beautiful, I say all that to say is like you built this beautiful structure where people are inside and they're also outside, and you have these moments where you feel outside and the world shows you that you're inside, and that you do have this support when you need it.
Mm.
You know, and sometimes if you just ask for it, if you allow people to
Yeah,
give it to you, you can
absolutely.
get it.
Absolutely.
And her character also kind of ties into a theme, and I know we're getting close, so let me try to wrap this up pretty quickly, that of grief,
Mm-hmm.
of pain, and you touched on it. Everyone in this book is touched by grief.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested to find out with you, again, there's other characters in the audience members, but you know, Mansoor, Bonnie, Mama. So how did, was that the plan? You know, was that the plan ultimately?
Oh,
To make us think, because I think we're all walking around grieving something, but you know, they are so obviously grieving. They're
yeah,
so obviously in pain.
I think it came out of just the natural construction of the story. I knew about Mama's loss. I
Mhm.
think that that sort of always, she kind of came with that when she came to me.
Mhm.
And I knew, I can't spoil stuff with Bonnie. I'll spoil if I explain sort of her losses and things. But I knew that was, and also the loss of Mansoor's loss. I can't, I'll spoil if I go into that. But I knew it was a part of how these characters were constructed. The other thing I'll say about Mama is she was also a chance to put the lens on sort of her perceiving an African American. I just wanted to
Mm.
mention that, and that we
Yes.
don't talk about that, right? Like that
Yeah.
lens of an African person being like, "What's going on here with you culturally?" And Bonnie being like, "I don't know what you want me to tell you," like, you know what I mean, and feeling suddenly self-conscious about something she never felt self-conscious about,
Hmm.
or that, you know. Um, but yeah, I think grief, I think anytime one uproots one's sense of home, there's a sense of grief, a sense of
Yes.
loss. I think even when we feel more free, I think freedom and grief are entangled in some way. Like something has to die or be disconnected to sort of emerge. I think
Mm-hmm.
every facet of life, that journey from girlhood to womanhood, in Bonnie's case, there's a grieving there.
Mm-hmm.
She has to get up and she has to step up and stop sort of leaning her way through life, right? So I think and even like the joke at the end when he's not going to be the center of her world anymore in the same way, right? He
Like,
has to, right? He has to.
what?
Um, so yeah, so I think grief, it's sort of in small ways and in big ways, is a part of life and a part of the story that's very important and definitely a theme.
Yeah.
And it has its heavy moments, but I try to keep it fun sometimes too.
And audience, there is laughter, so please know it, there is laughter. Um, and then I know we're getting relatively close, but I also wanted to talk to you as I was reading this. I was saying to myself, I was like, this feels, I mean, first of all, it's epic, right? Meaning, and I'm not saying that because I'm talking to you about this book, but because again, it goes so many places. We didn't even talk about so many characters. We even talk about Brazil that much. I mean, there's just so many places that this book takes you, that it felt very wide and expanse. There was a large expanse there. And I was saying to myself, I'm like, this feels like it's a movie, or it feels like it is a limited series. There is something there that I feel like should be expressed visually. I have a couple mental casting choices that I made myself,
Ooh,
but
I want to know.
I was saying for Mansoor, I'm thinking Damson Idris.
Okay, okay,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yeah,
I'm not even
I
mad
think
at
you can see it.
that.
I think
I'm
you
not
can see it.
even mad.
I see it. And then for Bonnie, I was thinking either Kiki Lane or Dominique Fishback.
I don't know either of them, but now I'm gonna look them. Oh, Kiki Lane. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I was thinking of those two, but
Mm-hmm.
and I know you have a background in film. You are also a playwright. Was that the intention? Because I'm telling you, I was like, I see scenes. These are scenes. These are moments.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I didn't give my usual spiel, and thank God I didn't have to, but I usually give a spiel about the influence of Hitchcock on the book,
Mhm.
and how it's structured like he's mostly known for like suspense films, but he had a whole life with these lighter hearted kind of Hollywood glamour films that starred Grace Kelly and Cary Grant, and To Catch a Thief is one of my favorites, and the structure is this sort of very visual. There usually a mystery is behind it, and so it's supposed to feel very cinematic. That's a huge. I'm more influenced by films, I think, than books. So that's absolutely true.
Ah, okay. Well, that made sense because the whole time, I'm thinking particularly a scene that I'm not trying to spoil, but towards the end of the book when, again, the women unite to help
Yes, the women unite.
Mansoor.
The women always unite.
And I felt like, oh my God, the way I wanted to see that part kind of play out for real, it felt like a kind of like a screwball comedy towards that part. It was like, we can't be doing this. What do you mean? Well, we can't help
Absolutely.
him if we don't do this
Yes,
thing.
yes.
And so, okay, so it does make sense. And so I do have To Catch a Thief. It's in my queue. So maybe I will watch it after we're
Oh,
done.
absolutely. I mean, you have to accept that Cary Grant's not going to break a sweat. The hair is never going to move. You have to accept the sort of universe of fun and frivolity that the film was supposed to support. But it's this it's just glamorous and beautiful and fun. And I wanted a touch of that
Mhm,
cinematic kind of. And the book, I think, evolved. The tone got more serious through the edits,
mhm,
but I wanted to keep that sort of quietly booing, that kind of this pleasant atmosphere that those films conveyed, the sense of play. Even if you think of a film, I don't know if you know A Warm December with Sidney Poitier. He
No,
actually
I don't.
directs A Warm December.
Mhm,
Everyone should know this film. It is a Black rom-com from I believe it's the 1960s, where he directs this film. It's set in London,
mhm,
and he plays this doctor that falls in love with this African, just some sort of dignitary,
mhm.
and she's sick. And the film was about their dynamic and their relationship. But again, I saw that film and I was like, wow, like this is so fresh and lively and glamorous and lovely. Like it's not gritty. In the book, at moments, it's gritty, but I also wanted it to feel sort of glamorous and lighthearted too.
Well, and in some ways, and now that you say that, and we're kind of we're talking about that, I I found myself thinking a little bit of oh my gosh, why am I forgetting the movie? It is Sidney Poitier and it's Paul Newman. Oh my
One
goodness,
with
I really
Diane
forgot it.
Carroll and
Yes,
yeah.
yes, yes.
Yes.
And in some sort of way, I guess I'm thinking about, particularly because this is, as you were saying earlier, this is a novel. It's also a historic novel. And Bonnie, maybe Mansour is the music and the center in a certain way, but Bonnie is the history.
Yes.
She is our guide through history. And I was thinking about how very particularly, Bonnie, she grew up in France. This is not a spoiler. She did live in France, everyone, as a child, and she went back to the US. Again, read the book. Read the book, get it from Twain, read the book, and you can find out why. But then she goes back to France, and it's around the time where you had a lot of Black Americans moving to France because it's like we can't do this right now. Segregation is enough.
Hmm.
I can't. Um,
Hmm.
did you intentionally set the book in those decades so you could talk about that particular history, or did the 60s and 70s just feel right for you?
So actually, this is kind of funny, but there's a book about it's turning out to be my second book about Claudine, Bonnie's mom, that I wrote already. And for the dates, you're so sweet, Vivian. For the dates to make sense for that book, I had to put this in the 60s because of Bonnie's age. So it
Mhm.
really was practical. But then I said, wow, that's also the year Dr. King was assassinated. And that's also the year that this happened. So I said, oh, this works out. So it was first like a function of just not wanting to erase a book that I knew was coming in terms of the logic of it. Um, it literally was just a logic decision. But then I was like, oh, this works for a really rich story. And so that's what happened. It was just a question of matching years.
Oh, perfect. Well, I gasped because I didn't get enough of her. And so,
Yeah.
audience, she is also in the book. Bonnie's mother is in the book. Bonnie's grandmother is in the book. Bonnie's grandmother's moment, another heartbreak, but she made it through. But it's good to know that we're going to see more of
Yes.
her because we did not get enough of her. And she isn't in the book a lot, but she's a very big presence in the book.
Yes. Yes.
And so is Sylvia, and we didn't get a chance to talk about her. So, but again, thinking about that through line, and as you were talking about, because yes, this is a love story, but I also see it as a story about women and about women throughout the generations, and about particularly very much Black. We have to be strong. There's this idea like, here's trauma, be strong. You know, here's something terrible, be strong. And you really see it in all of the women in the book.
Yes.
And there, it is, it's something that sticks with you, because I think you even had a section where it was when Bonnie, it was with Bonnie, and they were working with Mama and the other women who were in the kitchen, and they were saying, each one of them were saying, oh, in some way, this moment reminds them of their mothers. And the women in the book, and to a certain degree, are our mothers, you know, the readers' mothers. And again, is it something that just kind of flowed, or was the theme of motherhood just something that came naturally for you in this book?
Yeah, I knew it was a mother-daughter story. It was a mother-child story for both of them, I knew. So motherhood was always an important theme of the book. Yeah.
Oh, and if there are any questions, I do know there might be a question or two. We'll just keep going in case there are questions that you do want to ask. I do want to ask you, what were you listening to, or were you listening to anything when you were writing this book? Because again, music permeates.
Yeah.
I could go through a list of all the music. I started to write them down and then I stopped because there were so many. What were you listening to when you were writing this?
Oh my goodness. I was listening to my mother's music. Sweet Honey in the Rock was my mother's. She was in Sweet Honey in the Rock, and um, they have a song called Doing Things Together that she wrote that's on Spotify, and that was on loop. I was listening to a lot of an artist I mentioned in the book named Milton Nascimento.
Mhm.
I was listening to Jay-Z's Otis with Kanye West,
Mhm.
which is when I decided Bonnie needed to have like a homegirl to ride with in the search. And that's where Marie came, because I was like,
Ah, okay.
Kanye to her Jay-Z, like how, how's this gonna work? And then the book got light, like funny, and that
Mhm.
vibe. I was listening to Miles Davis, particularly a song called Fall, that's kind of in a loop.
Mhm.
I'm always listening to Herbie Hancock. I just think he's the best thing since sliced bread. Um, there's an artist named Lenny Andrade. She's Brazilian. Um, there is Tanya Maria, who's also Brazilian. Betty Carter. I'm always listening to Betty Carter, who Bonnie has a little bit of her energy, the part of her that is the manager part. That's the Betty Carter drive. Betty was incredible. I think a lot of women in the book have some of her energy. Sarah Vaughan, for
Yeah.
like so many, so many.
There's a lot. So I know that there was, and when I was doing my research on it, I know there was a little bit of a Spotify playlist that you had, but
Yeah,
certainly if you ever want to add to it, I'm sure, I know for me and many of the people who are reading the book or want to read the book are certainly interested. So feel free in
I didn't
adding.
even know you could add to it. Absolutely. The publisher made
Yeah.
that for me. So I will definitely, we can definitely add songs. That'd be fun.
Yeah, because it's again, it's such a powerful, a very powerful thing, because you were saying that this is how you decided that she should have a homegirl by listening to a
Mhm,
particular song.
mhm,
This is how you decided this. And going back to the universality of music, you think about those moments, this was the moment where I found out this thing. This was the moment that I found out the other thing. So music kind of takes you through your life in so many ways. And so that is, it's a powerful thing to know. And since we have a little bit of time, I do want to ask a little bit about, and I don't know if it's too soon to ask about the Claudia, if there's anything you want to say about about or about her book, or at least how the relationship tie, does the relationship, do we get to Bonnie in this potential new book? Because, and do we get more of Sylvia? And
Yeah, yes to all those questions. Yes to all those questions. This has been it's interesting. I'm still sort of working on it in the privacy of my own writing life. Like it's still with me right now. And the book is what I can say so far. I think it's gone from for me just and who knows where I'll go next, but the sense of the book sort of becoming even more embodied, if that makes sense. Like there's a way the book is settling more into characters, a more sort of like a more sensory, more of a sensory experience because her mother's a dancer. And so the body's becoming more prominent, more obvious, more important to the story in a way. There's a certain distance, and they dream in gold, right? Like it's a third person narrative, and it's a sort of a higher level. I mean, we get into characters certainly, but this book kind of dropped down into people a little bit deeper, where I think their points of view are even less reliable. I should say, because we're really in their minds, where it's just like, oh, I don't think that makes no sense, and somebody else is kind of over here with it. But it's again, it's historical fiction. Um, it's a book I started working on in 2020 when I was working in politics. Um, and it's a lot of its themes have become relevant again. And it's just a very I'm very excited by what it's becoming, but it's a different kind of challenge for sure. But
I would
thank you for
imagine
asking
so.
about it.
Oh, Omar's back. I guess we we're at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, this was an amazing conversation. It was so awesome to just watch both of you make all these connections. Um, yeah. Everyone, please buy Mai's book. Thank you so much, Mai, for being here.
This was an absolute pleasure. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Omar and Vivian. This was really,
Yeah.
really nourishing for me.
Yeah,
Wonderful
and
to be
thank you
here.
so much, Vivian, for stepping up again to be a moderator.
No, I'm happy to do it. And I'm sorry, I just have to say one more thing. This is probably one, I'm not saying it because you're here, one of my favorite book covers.
Oh yeah.
Just beautiful. And strangely enough, I looked up the illustrator and her name is also Vivian, so that must be why I like
Wow.
it.
Yeah, I know those of us who like deal with books a lot have, the book cover designs in mind a lot. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining
Thank
us.
you.
Please buy Mai's book through our store site, preferably, but you just buy it in general. Please read it. Let us know what you thought. And we'll be putting this talk up on YouTube probably on Monday. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.